Hello, and my name's Mick Fealty. Some of you may know me from the Slugger O'Toole blog. We're broadcasting this live to anyone who cares to watch and listen. It's myself and my old friend and mentor, R.G. Gregory. We have done conversations like this before, often with a theme. This one's very general, and we're going to try and do this every Wednesday night, somewhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in the evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about, well, we called it On the Importance of Listening. And partly this is really inspired by the whole sort of general melee of politics going on around, and a certain kind of critique that Greg and I would share, which is there's often far too much in the way of broadcast and not enough in terms of how politicians particularly receive. Although for me personally, it doesn't just extend to politicians, but most of the large and inherited social institutions that we have inherited over the years. So Greg, we were talking earlier on about an extraordinary piece of journalism by Nigel Dodds, who's competing for his seat in Belfast North, but today wrote a piece in The Guardian, which I think we both agree was kind of extraordinary, that it came from an MP from such an extreme political party in its own terms, but came across as one, pretty straightforward, literate politically and constitutionally, and very direct. And it's kind of extraordinary that those three things should mark it out as being really cutting through a lot of the noise and the babble and the sort of professionally mediated political messaging that we're getting in and day out in the election. Is there a relationship there between that apparently unsophisticated politics of the DUP and the directness of the message, perhaps?
Yeah, I was trying to follow the title, so I was just sitting listening. But the to me, it's all in a mess. I mean, public debate is in a mess. You can sit down and you can read a paper, and at the end of it, you think, well, what the hell's been said? Nothing's been said. It's as though all the experts gathered in London and in the big cities think they know everything, and that nobody else knows a thing, and therefore the other people must be told the most simplistic or passed over the most simplistic views of what the situation is. Nobody's got any real idea about what's going to happen in a fortnight's time or 10 days time or whatever it is, right? And yet, in a way, it may turn out to be what's always happened, and there won't be any real basic change at all, because the argument is going on at such a shallow level, with just occasional sort of flashes of apparent insight, that in a way nothing's changed, but everything has changed. It's, I have this, but we are at the end of something very big. We're at the end of a way of thinking that I think's gone back 4,000 or 5,000 years, and we've slowly been working through a way of a sort of people living, and it's got into the hands of governments, groups of people who stay in control. They may actually change party, or they may say it from a different viewpoint, but it's like either they're in a vacuum or we are. And I think the Houses of Parliament, for example, exactly shows why all the debate is done on from two long rows opposing each other. What you then get is, you don't get genuine debate. well, people stand up and make speeches about things, and sometimes you get enlivened by it. But in the end, that division right down the middle, splitting the country in half, and with the rules on either side sort of slightly different according to what the parties control, it's a dead end way of debating. And now you've got smaller parties beginning to press in. They're not going to, well, in terms of themselves, like the Green Party, I suppose, like UKIP, and you know what the Lib Dems are in a funny sort of position. That it's all going to be controlled and manipulated again by the big parties, but the party system doesn't work anymore. It just.
I think that's a critical. I mean, I think that's a critical thing, is about the party system. But I mean, if we just look at that whole business about the small parties coming up, and I suspect you're right. At the end of the day, it isn't going to change who's going to be prime minister next. So, whichever way the small parties stack up, they're either going to flow in behind the Conservatives or they're going to flow in behind the Labour. What they have, at least in the short term, done is to introduce a bit of uncertainty into the whole picture. I mean, not simply the uncertainty of an electoral outcome, but how governance is to be done once that outcome is known, because there will materially be other interests that have to be factored into that big two-way split. But essentially, to pinpoint the thing rather than on the shape of Parliament, which is we can maybe come back to before we're finished here. But to pinpoint the party system as one of the blocks to kind of moving forward, I think is interesting. What do you think the serious faults are on that score?
Well, you get caught between, as I suspect quite a lot of us have been caught between over the years, of voting or not voting, and there's a lot to say for both, maybe. I mean, sometimes you feel that what's going on is not worth voting for. It's not worth it. Nobody's saying that the chances of anything coming from it being what you want are very, very small, whether you go and cast your vote or you don't cast your vote. But even so, if you go and vote, all the time you're being told, right, there are only two parties can get in this election and have any power, so you must vote for one of them. And what that means is to say that you're always compromising your vote. You're compromising it. There's an article in The Guardian of the Observer this weekend by Terry Eagleton, who said, well, let's judge the parties by the quality of the literature they're putting out. And he said, in that case, everybody should vote for the Greens, because they're the only parties actually putting out a literate statement about what they believe, right? What they stand for, irrespective of if it's going to gain them votes or not. And if you as a voter then look at it and say, yeah, that's really good, but I can't vote that way because that's taking a vote away from the major party that I would prefer to get in, then in fact it makes the people stupid.
I think that's an absolute key. I think. I mean, I've been doing a profile of the local constituency here in Dorset by talking. I've made it my business to talk to the Green, the Lib Dem, the Labour guy, who's no chance at all, but the Conservative, and I haven't talked to the Green guy yet. I'm talking to him tomorrow. He'd be the last one on the list. But talking to the guy from UKIP, one of the things becomes obvious is, regardless of whether you would ever in a month of Sundays want to vote for UKIP, UKIP have brought things up that the party machine of the big two would have edited out, because that we can't talk about that, because if we talk about that, that compromises us with the C1s and C2s, or the A's and the B's, or whichever demographic they're trying to pull in just to get power over the kind of the broad swathe of the country. But by having these smaller parties, I mean, to a large extent, the SNP policy-wise offers Scotland nothing more than a Labour government was planning to give them anyway. They're pro-austerity, they're rather than anti-austerity, which in many cases, in any case, coming from most organised political parties, doesn't mean anything, because it never comes with a policy that shows us where all this free money would come from. But my reading of it, my limited reading of it, is that the Scots are putting a kind of a secondary bet on the SNP, who sit outside the governance structure of the UK Labour Party, as a way of, one, injecting some Scottish flavour into the wider UK debate. In other words, that the voters in Scotland can see themselves at least represented in the public square, the kind of wider public square, as something distinct and different from other parts of the United Kingdom. And it's like a forcing people to recognize that. But secondarily, that somehow the corporatization of the big two parties has at least some kind of break on it, some kind of external break, like unions on the big capitalist firms, if you like. This, but also what it does, it creates an opportunity, though I'm not saying this is often taken, for some real conversation. Now, there's a flaw in that, because as Terry Eagleton says, there's a problem, because the corporatization of politics means that the SNP falls foul of many of the kind of grand faults that you see in Labour, Conservative, and Lib Dems. But there's something, for me, I will always bring almost every conversation back to the internet, if you like. But what the internet has done is allowed people to see themselves not as stupid, but as having beliefs that other people share, having perspectives that other people share, but they don't see coming down, down the line through the television or the radio, where everything is kind of brought to a kind of a single point with reference to these two big players. And I think people have kind of discovered that they're not as stupid as big politics has assumed them to be.
No, but it's not. Stupid is the wrong word. I mean, I think people are trapped in one sense, like when you get somebody saying, or some writer saying, well, the people have got to do something about it. Well, everybody knows really that within the system that we have, which is supposed to be the best system in the world, there's actually very, very little that people can do about it. You can only be on the line. Your vote can only be of value if actually what you're voting for are two very, very different things. Mm. And in the early days of the Labour Party, and somebody pointed out that if we took the view now that you only vote for that you think will get in, then the Labour Party would not have existed. Because in those early days, the veterans of the early Labour Party, or the groups of people before that, they said, bugger this business of voting for other people. We'll vote for what we believe in. And that's what Labour Party has lost. It's lost its ability to be believed in and to fight for what it believes in, except at a very shallow level. The Conservatives don't have to do that. I mean, to me, it's extraordinary that a bloke who's come from Eton College can actually get on television with his sleeves rolled up, right, pretending that he's actually the voice of the people. You know what it's and he's learned, but they've learned the way of doing it, that they've learned the way of treating people, which both cause deference from sufficient numbers of people to give them the vote, right? But also begins to make people think, oh, they're human beings, you know, they're like us. But actually they don't. Well, they are like us. They're human beings, and they suffer in their own way, in their own, you know, in their own particular way. But somewhere we've got to break this, or it, not we, or somehow the system is only valid if it is able to break this kind of deferential feeling that there is in people, whether they know it's there or not. Or voting for that which seems to be winning, or voting for that which seems to have had enough experience of being in the position they are to do it better without, you know, with less risk. And until that break comes, that is, the risky has to be voted for, not for the next election, but because you believe in what people are saying. The vote's only useful if you are actually voting for someone who who is saying something that you can believe in and you value.
Well, and you also said something earlier there, which I think is worth repeating, is that if what gets talked about in the public domain a priori, in other words, before the election takes place, then no meaningful choice will be signified by the choice of who gets into number 10 Downing Street. Now, we were talking earlier, as I say, before the broadcast, and we were talking about there was that slightly ridiculous debate between all the opposition leaders. And it was fascinating just to see what happens when you take power out of the equation, because neither Nick Clegg, who is the retiring deputy prime minister, nor the prime minister himself had deigned to come and participate in all of that. So it became a more interesting exercise, more of a pointless exercise, certainly, and something that, you know, for 90 minutes, television really struggled to kind of serve something even entertaining, never mind meaningful. But then there were lots of things, and there was lots of comments about Nicola Sturgeon and how she got her points in and all the rest of it. And it struck me halfway through all of this that most of it is being treated as though it were a piece of entertainment, that it's not actually about political choice, that, you know, real term policy is almost the last thing on anybody's list to comment on. But there was one, as they say in the trade, cut through moment for me, and it's partly just because it was something Ed Miliband said that connected with me very strongly, and yet it was such a small detail. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't, we're going to do this or we're going to change that. It was a simple proposal to change the terms of the contract between tenants and landlords. Now, that partly resonated with me because it's something I've had a long-term and deep experience of, renting in the private sector. So clearly it connected with me on that basis. But it also connected to a much wider problem, which is the fact that house prices have got so high now, and even though money's very cheap, there's a shortage in supply of housing, that it seems to me, whatever you think about house ownership, it's simply not possible in the short to medium term for lots of people to buy their houses. Now, this is, you know, but when Miliband basically said that, he was making a concrete proposal, something that you could say, right, I know what that is. I know what that means. It's not a promise to deliver, you know, spring water to every second or third child every Tuesday week, or, you know, something that's, as much of the political discussion in this country, in Ireland, and in many other places, become an abstraction of reality. The proposal to offer tenants a 3-year tenancy cut through all the crap. Now, there are necessary arguments about that. I'm not saying that it is the answer to everything. In fact, it's almost certainly not the answer to very much, except it was a concrete proposal. It had a functional rationale to it, and it is an attempt to deal with a problem that is far from an abstraction, which is the handling of the private rental sector as though it were a speculative bubble there largely for the convenience of landlords who want to make a lot of money out of their property. And to come back to it, this idea of why it was a cut-through moment, it's because it seemed to mean something in the middle of all the mush about performances and worms and how's this going down with that demographic and that demographic. It was something direct and concrete and meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't completely dismiss Miliband, not by far. And when you see that somebody's being judged on the way that somebody snaps them eating a bacon sandwich, or then brings up this business about stabbing his brother in the back, and that's like stabbing the NHS in the back or something, or about this girlfriend that he used to have, right? As though nobody else has ever had such a situation. This is all part of tactics that are only being tried because they know that it works, because in the sense that the papers then pick it up, or the papers that want to, well, they all do, they pick it up and they push this, and they got photographs of this bloke eating a bacon sandwich and things like that. Then interviews with the woman that his girlfriend before he met his wife, and all things like that. And those suddenly become made into big political issues. Well, that's something that happens, that the Labour Party, ever since I come from a Labour family, right? Ever since I've been conscious of voting this on. The things are so unbalanced in the country that the press then plays the part of creating these situations, and people, I'm afraid, seem to get impressed by that measure of attention.
Well, exactly, and it, and to a large extent, that is the media pretending that to some extent they're kind of objective observers in all of this, and I think to some extent the financial and the business crisis within journalism has pushed them much more and more into the very, very short term. How many views can we get on the internet? How many shares on Facebook? How many Twitter shares? All the rest of it. And the last thing on the list of things that has to be talked about is it meaningful? Does this stack up? When Miliband makes a promise on X, Y, and Z, is he promising something he can deliver, or isn't he? And none of these things actually matter. It's as though the political journalists are afraid of making some kind of qualitative judgment on the thing for fear of getting that wrong. So it's easier to stay on the behavioralism aspect of it, the entertainment review aspect of it, treating politics as theatre without meaning beyond the boundary of the theatre itself. And we have things like it's not just a Tory thing, and it's not just it's the influence of media, but it's not necessarily about the individual agency of individual journalists. Owen Jones wrote a piece about 3 days ago saying that the real danger in the United Kingdom isn't the SNP, it's the DUP. And then what happens? Well, we know about the crisis in the DUP over gay marriages, and the health minister had to retire this morning. But then this piece from Nigel Dodds appears, basically another cut-through moment where somebody points out the bleeding obvious that if someone's got a vote to vote in the UK Parliament, then that vote needs to be respected, and the voters who made the decision to vote that way also respect it. But in terms of the game of push and shove and legitimization and delegitimization, the abstraction of politics, all of that just is subject to gameplay.
And yet something happens that in a way does sum up something in a nutshell. In my early sort of days, and quite a long time into adulthood, the richest person in the world was the Queen of England, right? And that was the society that I, in my way, fought against, in my way, not politically, but, I had a very, very strong view about a society where that happened. Now the Queen has fallen off the list of the richest of the rich people, right? And business has taken over. And there are an astonishing number of people in this country who are billionaires. Billionaires, not millionaires now. And that money has been gathered up because of this business. If you look at any skyline now of any capital city, you judge it by what the tallest buildings were. They used to be churches, right? Then they became these skyscrapers where people lived that turned something. Now they're just all business buildings. You only have to look at the skyline to see who rules, who's in charge of what is considered the most important at the center of a country is business, big business. And people slip into that through all sorts of, some people get onto it because they win the lottery or they're film stars or something like that. But the bulk of the money is there tied up in business. And that's the society that we have now, where we are afraid of. The Labour Party is afraid of business, right? It's the political parties don't have the power. They don't have the money that business people have. And the influence is in America particularly, where these the huge American corporations that then demand the rights of individuals when anybody tries to judge them, right? They have enormous power in America, but that power is over here as well.
Okay, Greg. I've been doing broadcasts every morning at 10 o'clock on a thing called Periscope. And I started off saying that was going to last for 10 minutes. Then when I recorded the first one, it actually went on for 15. And it's gradually moved out to 20. And I did one the other day at 23. So for a 10-minute talk at 23 minutes, that's double your money, or testing the patience of your audience. We're going to try, and it's difficult for Greg and I because we're both people who like to talk in a long, discursive manner, but we're going to try and keep it to half an hour every Wednesday night. So can't promise to start
Monday
time.
Night.
We connected.
Monday night.
Sorry?
Monday night.
Oh, it was Monday night, you're right. Right, okay. Yes, Monday night. It's Monday night. Tonight it'll be Monday night next week. And somewhere between sort of half 9 and quarter to 10, we will attempt a kind of a regular broadcast. This week it's been about politics, but it could be about anything else.
Yeah. But can I say one final thing? We are opinionating here, and I don't put a great deal of store by opinions. Right? There's something deeper than opinions, and that to me, you have to give under the opinion to the dream, to the poetry. Because that's where the real feeling and involvement in people is going on.
And on that thought, we'll leave it for tonight, and we'll maybe delve into that other side of it next week.
Okay.